It's good to be back here. You seem to have a bit more snow up here than we do down in Madison, but for me, one of the most powerful teachings in the Christian scriptures is found in the book of Mark, chapter 10, verses 17 through 22, where he writes, "As Jesus was setting out on a journey, a man ran up to him and knelt before him and asked him, 'Good teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?' And Jesus said to him, 'Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone. You know the commandments: do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not bear false witness, do not defraud, honor your father and your mother.' And the man said to Jesus, 'Teacher, I've kept all these things from my youth up.' Looking at him, Jesus felt a love for him and said to him, 'One thing you lack. Go and sell all you possess and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come follow me.' But at these words the young man was saddened, and he went away grieving, for he was one who owned much property." This story and the verses that follow are part of a commentary by Jesus on the role of wealth in our lives. Yet it is not the possession of wealth that is seen as the rich young ruler's impediment to entering the kingdom, but rather his unwillingness to give it to the poor. Now, in recent years, we have observed the actions of persons like Bill and Melinda Gates, Warren Buffett, Mark Zuckerberg, who are working to give away most of their vast fortunes, up in one case to 99%, to charitable and public uses in which they believe. Now, to be sure, making such gifts will not cause any of these people to end up in the poorhouse. They will not starve or be homeless. Yet, as Melinda Gates put it, we started our foundation because we believe that we have a real opportunity to help advance equity around the world, to help make sure that no matter where a person is born, he or she has the chance to live a healthy, productive life. Or as Benjamin Franklin put it a bit more pithily, "I'd rather have it said he lived usefully than he died rich." Now, while I suspect we don't have many Mark Zuckerbergs, Bill and Melinda Gates, or Warren Buffetts in the room this morning, any of you out there? I know that we do have many generous people, very generous people who are part of this congregation. In his book, The Generosity Path, from which our reading was this morning, Mark Ewart, who some of us met actually at District Assembly a couple of years ago at a workshop he presented, he offered the following definition of generous from the Oxford English Dictionary. Generous means freely giving more than is necessary or expected. Again, freely giving more than is necessary or expected. These are key notions of generosity, and it does not require great wealth. It simply requires one to look to the needs of others, an act of altruistic fashion. As Martin Luther King Jr. put it, life's persistent and most urgent question is, what are you doing for others? This was the question that Jesus posed to the rich young ruler. Not how he obtained his wealth, but rather what would he do with it? Would he use it to maintain his luxurious lifestyle? Would he be able to take it with him to heaven after he died, to the kingdom? Would he use it to enhance his status and earthly power? Or would he give it to those in need, those to whom Jesus referred in another context as the least of this, our brothers and sisters? Now, notions of generosity are central to Judaism as well, as Steve pointed out in his reading this morning. It is referred to as tzedakah. While this can be translated from English as charity, it's a broader concept, having an aspect of justice to it. As the Judaism 101 website puts it, the word tzedakah is derived from the Hebrew root tzedei dalet kof, meaning righteousness, justice, or fairness. In Judaism, giving to the poor is not viewed as a generous, magnanimous act. It is simply an act of justice and righteousness, the performance of a duty, giving the poor their due. Now, while I've been referring to Judeo-Christian sources in this discussion, generosity is a theme in many religious traditions. For example, Aisha Stacy, writing on the website islamreligion.com, observes, generosity was among the countless good qualities of the Prophet Muhammad. He was the most generous of people, and he used to be the most generous at Ramadan. One day, the Prophet Muhammad offered prayer in the mosque and then hurriedly went to his house and returned immediately. A companion asked why he left, and he replied, well, I left a piece of gold at home which was given for charity, and I disliked letting it remain a night in my own house, so I brought it to the mosque to distribute. For Muslims, our worldly possessions are bounties from God, who is Al-Karim, the most generous. Muslims believe that everything originates from God and everything will return to him. Thus, it is logical to behave as if that which we possess is merely a loan, something we are obligated to preserve, protect, and ultimately share. Whenever the Prophet Muhammad met a miserly person, he advised him to be more generous and charitable. Ibn Abbas said that he heard the Prophet Muhammad say, the believer is not the one who eats when his neighbor beside him is hungry. And another companion heard the Prophet say, the believer is simple and generous, but the wicked person is deceitful and ignoble. Generosity has been formalized in Islam amongst the 5 pillars, one of them being zakat, or the practice of almsgiving. This, as I understand it, is a practice requiring giving away 10% of one's wealth, not your income in any given year, but your wealth, to the poor. We also just heard about the Buddhist concept of dana. This had its origins with the forest monks who depended for their sustenance on the receipt of gifts from the lay people among whom they lived. Today, monks practicing in that tradition are supported by persons living in nearby towns for their food and support of their communities. Buddhist writer and practitioner Philip Moffat describes how dana applies in daily life. Lunch is the last meal of the day for these monastics, and they can only receive what is offered to them. So when you stand in line placing food in the alms bowl of one monk after another, the joy of giving is palpable. The deeper lesson is that each of us is equally dependent on others for the blessing of our food. We are all interconnected with one another and with the earth in a web that goes beyond the marketplace of commercial exchange. We flourish or perish together through interwoven acts of dana arising from benevolence and integrity of people we shall never meet. This too is the power of dana. Even when practiced without consciousness, it arises and it spreads. When you mindfully practice dana, you come into contact with its joyful healing power. Reverend William Murray, a religious humanist, discusses the issue of generosity from a humanist perspective. Writing in his book, he acknowledges that there are altruistic, generous impulses that are part of human nature. By the same token, he also recognized that in some instances, people tend to be more generous in giving to organizations from which they will derive a personal benefit. Further, according to Murray, recent brain studies show that humans derive pleasure from giving in much the same manner as they do from food or sex. And some recent brain studies reveal that some people might be more hardwired to be generous than others. In any event, Murray concludes that to be generous is surely a vital component of our humanness and an important humanist value because it adds greatly to the quality of our lives and the lives of others. Thus, generosity is a value common to many religious traditions, much like the so-called Golden Rule. But one question that continues to perplex thinkers is whether it makes any difference if the giver knows the recipient and the recipient knows who's making the gift. The medieval Jewish thinker Maimonides crafted what he called the golden ladder of charity. And I'm going to read from on his ladder what he would consider the least charitable to the most. The least is when donations are given grudgingly. Next on the ladder, when one gives less than he should, but does so cheerfully. When one gives directly to the poor upon being asked is next. And when one gives directly to the poor without being asked. Then there are the donations when the recipient is aware of the donor's identity, but the donor still doesn't know the specific intent of the recipient. And the next are donations when the donor is aware of to whom the charity is given, but the recipient is unaware of the source. The next is giving assistance in such a way that the giver and recipient are unknown to each other. Communal funds administered by responsible people are also in this category. And to Maimonides, the highest form of charity is to help sustain a person before they become impoverished by offering a substantial gift in a dignified manner, or by extending a suitable loan, or by helping them find employment or establish themselves in business so as to make it unnecessary for them to become dependent on others. Now, Ewart suggests in his book that keeping the recipient and the giver from knowing one another may not be best in all situations. In his view, this may deprive the giver and the recipient from developing a relationship arising from the gift. In some instances, it would deprive the recipient of the ability to express gratitude for the gifts. And so he suggests that you must look at this and evaluate it each on its own merits. Now, what I've talked about this morning so far has been on the individual-to-individual giving relationships. However, I'd also like to address for a moment relationships of generosity between persons and organizations which they are involved with, including our relationship and your relationship to this fellowship. As you'll hear from Tom Schuppe in a few minutes, this Sunday is the official kickoff of our annual pledge campaign. Open Circle is supported in its entirety by the gifts of its members. We do not have an endowment fund. We do not have other significant sources of revenue, such as rental income or similar funds or membership dues. We must depend on your generosity. We must ask you to consider what this fellowship means to you and what would happen if it were not here. And ultimately, we ask you to translate the meaning of this fellowship to you into concrete financial contributions. As I've stated from this pulpit in the past, I'm concerned, very concerned, that our Unitarian Universalist values, as reflected in our 7 principles, may come under more challenge in the coming years. Our respect for the inherent worth and dignity of all persons, our support for the democratic process, our open and free discussion of issues, and our commitment to the web of connections with other human beings in the natural world. All of these values are in danger. This fellowship is present in this community to uphold and promote those values. Now, there are many ways that you can show your generous support for this community. Certainly, your active support of our programs, including those being developed by the new Social Justice Now Committee, is critical. Your advocacy for those in this community, especially those whose rights may be challenged because of their race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, and gender expression, will be critical in the days to come. But to be frank about it, we need your generous financial support to allow us to move this fellowship forward. Because I only come up here once a month, I can perhaps see more clearly the growth in numbers and spiritual maturity of this community, much like a relative who only sees your children from time to time and notes how fast they are growing. We need to consider what we could do with more financial resources, especially as to issues of staffing in this congregation. Now, I know that for some, a sermon like this may be challenging, maybe like fingernails on the chalkboard, because of prior experience in faith communities where there was an overemphasis on stewardship and fundraising. This sensitivity, unfortunately, is common in our Unitarian Universalist movement. We are much more likely to be comfortable talking about sex and politics rather than money, which are the three big taboos. But during this annual campaign, I invite you to have a frank and open discussion about the value of this fellowship to you, not only in your gifts of time and service, which are critical, but also in your financial support. This year, we are again asking as many of you as possible to make a pledge of support. This provides you with an opportunity to quantify your level of commitment to Open Circle, but it also provides critical information for the Board of Trustees to make plans for the upcoming budget and to decide what actions can be taken to advance this fellowship in the coming year. I want to thank you all for the support that you have given to this fellowship Open Circle in the past, and I encourage you to make a generous pledge for the upcoming year. Blessed be. Tom?